Hi guys, welcome back to another episode of the Navvai Shift. Today I got my co-host Darnell, and today I'm joined with Matt Cooper. He is the co-founder and executive chairman of Exceptional Ventures, which is a London-based venture capitalist fund backing early stages companies that help people, live longer and healthier. So, Matt, how are you?
I'm good. Good. How are you?
I'm very well, thank you. I know I did touch on, VC and Exceptional Ventures very just a little midget. People that don't know who you are and what it is you do, could you give us a brief introduction?
Yeah, sure. So, I mean, my background is completely different than that. So, from the time I was a little boy, I wanted to be a scientist. So, went off to school, studied chemistry and physics, and had delusions of grandeur. So, I thought I was going to be a cross between Albert Einstein and Thomas Edison. When I got to college, I met somebody who was so much smarter than I was. Probably a good moment for me. My very best friend. Turned out he won the World Math Olympiad when he was in high school. So a pretty impressive fellow. And spent some time in the lab and realized that wasn't for me. So went off and joined a consultancy. That led to working in their financial services practices, which in turn led to being part of the founding team of Capital One Bank in the U.S., usually described as the first fintech in the world. And so I was there for 13 years and had an amazing experience. Left there in 2001. We'd become quite a big company. I'd moved to London by that time. So I was responsible for their international businesses. We'd set up businesses in Canada, the UK, Spain, Italy, France, and South Africa. And I was running 6,000 people in 6 countries and having less fun than I was having before. So I left. I'm very good at leaving things. So I left science without knowing what I wanted to do and fell into the next step. Left Capital One without knowing what I wanted to do. And gradually decided what I wanted to do was advise entrepreneurs. I love building businesses. I didn't have a specific thing that I wanted to do. And I guess I'm more of a generalist than a specialist. So started advising entrepreneurs. It was 2001 in London. I was told there weren't very many and maybe I should go to California, where there were a few. But I was lucky. I met some interesting ones. So, for example, I met the guys founding Octopus Investments, which I then shared for 22 years, and then gradually started making investments. It occurred to me that if I were working with a great entrepreneur, that I thought was building a wonderful business, and I thought maybe I was helping in some way as well, and they were raising money, why wouldn't I also invest? So gradually became an investor at a time when there weren't very many angel investors investing in early stage companies. Over 2 decades, made about 200 angel investments, mostly in consumer companies. Not very much fintech because, as I said, I'm a generalist. I like learning new things, and I felt like I had done fintech, so a few. Found myself doing more and more in health and wellness because it's a personal passion of mine. And it's where I think the next big opportunity is. So, fintech's been sort of the big thing for 15 years. In the last year, investment in health and health tech in VC and private equity has surpassed fintech. Our understanding of the human body and AI and things like that are progressing so quickly that I think there's an opportunity to do what we do, which is invest in, as you said, companies that help people live longer, healthier, and happier lives. We coined a term called joy span. So, people have started talking about health span, how long you live and are healthy, as opposed to just lifespan. And we talk about joy span.
Tell me a little bit more about that joy span.
So there are a host of things. So we think of the world in three sections. One is how do you stay well as long as you can? And that's about how do you eat well, exercise right, how do you manage stress, manage your sleep, have a sense of purpose so that you stay well as long as you can. Then, given that you're going to get sick anyway, how do you screen and capture those things early? No one dies of stage 1 cancer, they do die of stage 4 cancer. So how do you make sure you're catching things early? And then finally, how do you improve the therapeutic interventions, the pharmaceuticals, the other interventions, so that when you get sick, you have the best chance of getting well? And Joyspan for us grew particularly out of the wellness side because if people started talking about health span, as I said, because, people were living long, miserable lives in nursing homes, for example. And so the goal was, how do you live healthy and vibrant as long as you can? But sometimes the answer might be something that you wouldn't want to do. So, for example, at least in primates, if you restrict their calories by 30%, they live 20% longer. And that's not something most people would necessarily want to do as a trade-off. Never drink a glass of wine, never eat a bite of sugar, never travel across the time zone, go to bed and get up at exactly the same time every day. So we think there's this thing called joy span, which is how do you live in a way that is healthy without taking all the fun out of things. I mean, I know that sounds overly simplistic, but how do you live a set of trade-offs? So you want to live long and healthy, but not at the expense of doing everything that you enjoy.
I see. So, Matt, I did want to ask a question. So, I think it's clear to see that your passion is in like the wellness industry. Other than, I guess, it being your passion, what kind of first drew you to this industry?
I mean, it's a few things probably. One is, like I said, I studied science when I was younger, and I've always had a passion for science. My father was a doctor. I came to sports and activity quite late. So my dad was a doctor, but he was purely cerebral. So not the kind of father who would teach you to throw a ball when you were 5. So I came on to sports quite late. I was the kid in high school who, if I got picked for your team, you would groan and go, "Oh no, we have Matt on our team." And then when I got a little bit older, I took up rock climbing, later competitive cycling, and found that, physical challenges were as interesting as mental ones. So there's the science side of things, there's the sports side of things, and it's just also an area that's taking off, right? I mean, we have an aging population. Our understanding of the human body is progressing, so rapidly, the way that the brain works, the way that the gut and brain are linked. It's just, there's so much new knowledge coming out, and I love that. I love to learn new things.
How do you separate hype from genuine product market fit when you're elevating companies?
Yeah. So yeah, I would say one thing, if I don't know if you guys reach out to a lot of people who are potential investors. I mean, one thing that I think is really important is the deal flow that you see in the first place. So I think I was really quite lucky. I started doing this when the startup ecosystem in the world, let alone in England, was about this big. And so by being a good guy and having integrity, hopefully, and adding value, I got to know everybody that there was. And so I have a good reputation, which means I tend to attract the best startups, I believe. I mean, that sounds really arrogant, but I believe that when somebody is sitting and thinking, whose money do they want? They might think of Matt Cooper or Exceptional Ventures. And I believe that the very best founders get funded no matter what the environment is. So part of it is who you see in the first place, right? If I started up today and said, "Hey, I have some money to invest," the only people I would see would be the ones who didn't get money from the people they tried first. So I would get a negatively selected group of companies. I suppose the rest is practice, right? I mean, I look for entrepreneurs who are brilliant, who are passionate about what they do, but are also great learners. So people who listen and can hear diverse opinions, are able to pivot when their initial idea doesn't work perfectly, because it just about never does. So those kind of entrepreneurs. Look for businesses that there's really a need for. It's amazing. I mean, that sounds obvious, but it's amazing how many people come to you with an idea for a business, and maybe they thought of it because it's something they would have liked. But when you think about how many people there really are out there who need it, or whether that market's already well served. I'll give you what sounds like a ridiculous example. I went to an entrepreneur pitch event, and as I was leaving, a guy ran up to me and he said, "Oh, I loved what you said. Can I talk to you for a minute?" And I said, "Okay." And he said, "I'm a doctor and I have this idea. I want to start a chewable multivitamins business." Now, you might be thinking the same thing I am. So I said to him, "What makes you think that's a good idea?" And he said, "Well, because there are a lot of people who don't like swallowing pills." I said, "Well, that's true. But there are two things. One is, as a doctor, you must know that almost every study that's ever been done suggests that most people don't need multivitamins. And number two, the aisle's already full of chewable ones as well as non-chewable ones. So this is a business with no need." That's an extreme and silly case. But, does the solution you have satisfy a real problem? Who does it solve it for? Is it at a price that they're willing to pay? Is it defensible in any way, or can anybody just copy you if it works and do it better than you just did? I think it's a matter of practice. And again, a huge amount of it is the entrepreneur.
But when do you think is the right time to pivot?
Depends what you mean by pivot. I guess for me, I wasn't thinking about your whole business was a disaster and you need to pack up, go home, and do something else. I was thinking about, people have plans for how they're going to distribute. They think they're going to be a B2C company. And it turns out that is cost prohibitive, or the people they thought they were going to reach are too hard to reach. Well, maybe they can be a B2B2C company. So I was talking to a company this morning that wants to provide digital pediatric care, because pediatric care in the UK is quite poor. If you try to make an appointment with a doctor for your child, there's a 75% chance they won't be pediatrically trained at all. And so we were talking about how they were going to distribute, and we were talking about B2C, but we were talking about B2B2C. So partnerships with things like MomsNet or with nurseries or places where the right people congregate, and the organization that's sort of in between already has some credibility. So, being able to realize that what you were trying to do isn't going to work, and thinking about what else might be worth doing, I would describe as a pivot. But I also think that, an entrepreneur that's the most impressive is one that's already thought about those possibilities. I'll give you an example. A lot of what we do is science-based. And I was working with a company that works in crop genetics. A lot of scientists will present their plan of getting from A to Z, as they have to go from A to B to C to D all the way to Z. And each one of those is something new they have to invent. Well, and if each one of those has like a 90% chance of working, the chance of them all working is still close to zero. So this particular geneticist I met said, look, we need to invent this, but if for some reason we can't, then we can do this, or we can do this, or we can do this, or we can do this. And had the whole thing thought of as much more of a flow chart than just a series of steps. And that kind of intellectual flexibility and ability to pivot and change is kind of more what I meant.
So do you see that regularly? Like, it's a thing where the entrepreneurs that come to you, they have like a kind of spider diagram of where a business can go, or are they just very tunnel vision focused where it's just linear?
Yeah, so I think too often very linearly. And I think that's, like I said, that's one of the things that separates the best from the worst, is a realization that it's probably not going to work out exactly the way I thought it was. And so having alternate plans, having multiple pathways to success, and simply having the mindset that says, okay, when I hit a wall, I can try to keep bashing my head through it, and maybe I will find a way through it. But maybe I also ought to look for paths around. And so I think there's a sort of mental agility that a good entrepreneur needs to have.
Absolutely. And it's on the topic of pivoting, I did want to ask, Matt, are there would you say companies that's got a lot of synergy, for example, like mental health companies, femtech, or alternate nutrition, that are maybe just scratching the surface in terms of innovation? Or is there a lot of unmet needs in terms of these industries?
Yeah, look, I think in healthcare in general, we barely scratched the surface. I mean, we're moving so quickly, whether it's understanding the root causes of depression and the fact that is almost certainly many different illnesses, and therefore developing a wider array of treatments, moving toward personalized medicine in general, understanding the gut biome. You mentioned femtech and female healthcare. I mean, most studies were done on men for 100 years. And then the assumption is that if you just treat women like little men, that'll be the right answer, when it clearly isn't always. Pediatric care, the same way, very few studies done there. The AI is accelerating drug development. Another example, stress management and mental health care, the use of psychedelics in healthcare, the use of wearables and electronics in stress reduction, in data collection, helping people with sleep, stress management. I think all of these areas, we've hardly scratched the surface.
So why do you think there actually is that lack of awareness? And I guess what does Exceptional Ventures do to kind of fly the flag of wellness and obviously the healthcare space?
Yeah, so actually, it's funny. I think that lack of awareness of the subject is no longer so much of the issue. You can't pick up a paper today without reading about wellness. That word is everywhere, wellness. And some celebrity's endorsement of a new supplement or a new wearable device or something. I think one of the biggest problems now is separating the fact from the fiction. A bunch of the stuff that's being sold is garbage science. It's junk science. And in some cases being sold by real scientists who have perjured themselves. I mean, there's a guy named David Sinclair, who's a bona fide Harvard longevity researcher, was chairing several longevity organizations. He's decided that he'd rather sell junk to people, including a dog food that he claims will let your dog live many years longer. His ex-colleagues have lambasted him. He's been forced to resign from those positions. 7 of the 12 companies that he's founded have failed, and yet he's worth $100 million, and his ex-colleagues are living in faculty housing. So, one of the biggest problems is that as a consumer, it's bad in financial services, but it's worse in health. If you're sick or worried about yourself and your children, you need to go no further than Instagram or TikTok to find 1,000 people promising you a supplement that will regrow your hair, make sure you never have another bad night's sleep, You'll never feel stress or anxiety again. You'll basically be Superman. There's no regulation of those claims. Most of them are baloney. And increasingly, the sector is attracting people. In the beginning, the health tech sector attracted really talented, really purpose-driven entrepreneurs who wanted to change human health for the better. Now people are realizing it's a good place to get rich. And I don't mind people getting rich because, of course, to touch as many lives as possible, even a good company has to grow and succeed. And everybody should get rich along the way. I'm a good capitalist, but not by selling junk and not by selling false hope. People lambast their doctors, right? I only got 10 minutes with my doctor. He misdiagnosed me. It was terrible. But your doctor at least has the Hippocratic Oath. So he or she won't hurt you on purpose, right? If you go into your doctor and you say, my chest hurts, I want you to do open heart surgery. Here's £1 million. And your doctor knows you're having acid reflux because you ate a bad burger at lunch. Your doctor's not going to do open heart surgery. If he was a banker, he would. And then when he was challenged, he would just say, well, I sold the customer what he asked for. And a lot of the wellness industry is starting to look like that because the guy selling you wellness supplements doesn't have a Hippocratic Oath. His products are not regulated and so forth. So it's a real worry to me.
So how do you differentiate between what's real and what's fake? If you're just a regular person, I don't know, that's just looking, like you said, so just something simple as some multivitamins to make them more active and don't feel as tired. Like, how do you?
I think it's amazingly difficult as the man on the street, right? I mean, take financial services, for example, pretty complicated and it's regulated. So, there are some controls on how much garbage I can try to sell you. And people look to experts. They look to, let's say, Martin Lewis and Money Saving Expert if they want impartial advice. And I think he's done a good job at building what most people perceive to be impartial. There's a consumer protection business like Which. I think in the health business and the wellness business, it doesn't exist yet, actually. And so most people don't have the time, the energy, or the expertise to do their own homework. And so I think it's really dangerous. It's one of the things that's on our agenda is thinking about how we can, perhaps in conjunction with other good voices in the industry, maybe set up some kind of foundation or some kind of educational or impartial evaluator. I mean, obviously, we try to assess, and we do assess. We bring a lot of expertise to bear. We don't invest in a company unless what it's selling really, really works. But educating the customer is hard because people want magic pills. So the easier it is and the bigger the promise, the more likely I am to jump at it. The government hasn't yet regulated things. And here's an example, even when consumers do know. So we knew 50 years ago that smoking caused lung cancer and killed people. So we told them. But they kept smoking. Then we put pictures of diseased lungs on the pack, but they kept smoking. Then we taxed them like 2,000%. So people who couldn't even afford to buy their kids' birthday presents would still buy cigarettes, and they kept smoking. And smoking didn't start to drop until the government stepped in and said, you can't smoke in public spaces. You can't smoke in restaurants. You can't smoke in the car with your children. And then smoking started to fall. So I think there's consumer education, there's government regulation, and I think it's going to be a long time. I think it's really hard. I have friends come to me all the time and say, what supplements do you take and why? What should I take? What should I think about? These are hard questions. How often should I get myself screened? I tell my friends they should go to a dermatologist regularly if they had a lot of sun when they were kids. Why? Because you're going to get skin cancer. You don't want to die of skin cancer. All you need to do is get checked up every 6 months, and you'll never will. There are more and more screenings becoming available. Like I said, it used to be for tens of thousands of dollars. You could go spend a day in a fancy clinic in Mayfair if you had the money and get screened. Well, and if you didn't have the money, tough luck. Well, the cost down to $2,000 now, and starting to be covered by insurance. So pretty soon people will be able to go and get screened. I have a friend, I think I mentioned already, I have a friend who just got caught, had a stage 1, very early stage 1 lung cancer get caught because he went and got a full body screening way before symptoms would have materialized. He's going to be fine. I spoke to a potential investor in our fund whose sister had just died of breast cancer at age 33 because they didn't catch it until it was stage 4. So, supplements and what you should take and how much you should manage your sleep is one thing. And then, getting yourself checked out with real preventative medicine, which is starting to emerge, is another. And it's starting to be affordable. So, I look forward to a day when everybody has access to that.
Nice. That's a great take. I wanted to delve into a little bit around the tech side of things, and probably would agree on this, but tech has changed how funds operate just as much as how startups build. So, but are you seeing the real impact from like deal sourcing to supporting founders post investment? How you're seeing it impact your industry?
So yeah, so I think in our industry, it's everywhere. So on one hand, simple as some of the streamlining that you might think already existed. So patient records are usually handwritten by a doctor. They get lost, they get misplaced. I mean, there's simple automation of a system like that. That sounds like it should have been done in 1980, but it's happening now. Incredible. Another example that sounds pretty simple, the government put a regulation out last year that said if you're having a major surgery, your doctor needs to give you a customized plan of what to do between now and then to maximize your chances of coming through it well. Well, that's fine to put the regulation in place, but doctors don't have the ability to do that. So we invested in a company that uses your information and the information about the surgical procedure you're going through. And let's say you're 50 pounds overweight and your spouse has been telling you to lose it for 20 years, but you haven't paid any attention. And now you're at risk and you're having open heart surgery in 6 months. Well, it turns out that if I can get you out for twice a day for a brisk walk between now and then, it's too late to lose the weight. But if I can get you out for a brisk walk twice a day between now and then, I might cut your odds of dying on the table in half. So providing a person with a simple app and a simple capability, they adhere to that because the outcome is so stark. But then on the other hand, much more high tech, AI will, I think, shortly replace doctors for diagnosing illness, right? I mean, a doctor was educated however many years ago, can't possibly keep up with all the investments in the field, has only the experience of his or her own caseload, so misses edge cases all the time. So technology for diagnosis, I think, is an enormous opportunity. Testing, here's an example. So, current best testing for breast cancer is a mammogram. Pretty unpleasant for a woman and pretty inaccurate. We've recently met a company that believes it has a urine test that will detect early stage breast cancer. So all kinds of new capabilities in diagnosis, in treatment, everywhere. I mean, tech is part of what's moving this industry along so rapidly.
Is there any automations that are playing a huge role within your business at the moment?
Well, so automation in some respects, an example would be, we're investors in a company called Patches, which front ends almost every doctor's surgery in the country now. So when you call, you give a list of what's bothering you and symptoms and so forth. It automatically triages that into information and figures out whether you've got an urgent need or not, way more effectively than a receptionist or a nurse on a phone. So there's that kind of automation. As I was saying, there's back office automation so that patient records and patient information is available. A lot easier to take care of you if I know all of your past information rather than starting from scratch and getting what you may or may not remember. So the automation of patient records and so forth. So huge opportunities, I think. Yeah, I mean, technology in every respect.
I did want to ask, so we've done our research to the industry and there's been like a growing sort of recognition in terms of the impact that VCs have with regards to like social responsibilities. So what impact do you think Exceptional Ventures has in terms of obviously bringing out the message and making sure the message is authentic? Like you said, there's a lot of messaging that could be false.
Yeah. Yeah. So look, I mean, it's funny. I mean, when I started investing 20 years ago, the word impact didn't exist. I cared about investing in companies that I felt were doing good for the world by my own, random definition. Now we've got a list of ESG guidelines and impact guidelines that have been created that sort of help define that area. And I think on the bright side, there's been a recognition that impact does not mean mom and dad making organic soap in the garage. It means companies making people's lives or the world better. Because I think there used to be a view that impact meant, if a company was positive impact, it was going to be negative return. And you were going to make some compromise. And I think that's nonsense. I think that over time, people want to work for, they want to invest in, and they want to buy from companies that are doing good. And so more and more, I think there's actually a penalty in reverse. If you're not doing good, you have trouble hiring. You have trouble getting customers and you have trouble getting funding. So I think on the bright side, we're moving toward a world where capitalism can be a force for good because people want to work for, invest in, and buy from companies doing good. Exceptional Ventures isn't formally an impact fund, so we don't follow only those guidelines. On the other hand, we think that investing in companies that help people live happier, healthier, longer lives is by definition positive impact. So if one of our companies doesn't happen to fit the ESG guidelines, I'm more than confident in telling you why it's a good thing. So as an investments business, we see ourselves as living in probably the most impactful space that there is. I think we take it a step further because I was talking to you about this sort of junk science problem, and the fact that now everybody's realized that health tech is the new fintech means every entrepreneur and every investor suddenly wants to get on the bus, and a lot of them don't have good intentions. So one of the things we're trying to figure out is how we create a voice for ourselves and for the good guys in the industry. So I mentioned David Sinclair. Like I said, he's worth $100 million despite perjuring himself and despite all of his companies failing. His colleagues kicked him out of his chairmanship positions. They wrote nasty letters that are nowhere except in the academic press, and they live in academic housing. So who's laughing? And so we think there's a real opportunity to band together the good voices. So educating the consumer, for sure, lobbying the government for appropriate regulation so that you can't make nonsense claims about how this wearable is going to cure your anxiety overnight, or this pill is going to mean you never have another bad night's sleep. I think that's a slow process. I think the more we can get the good voices on the right stages, the more we can speak to the consumer and the more we can speak to the government. So I think, a VC normally sees its role as, at best, taking care of its investors and its entrepreneurs. And we believe in doing that, in a really exceptional way, pardon the pun, which is really taking care of them. I mean, we're a mission-driven fund. Our mission is to change the world. We believe if we do that, out inevitably will come great returns. But we're beginning to see our mission is bigger than that. So how do we get involved in educating the consumer? How do we get involved in lobbying the government? And how do we give other people who are on the right side of the fence bigger voices? And so that's something we continue to work on.
That's huge, and you speak with so much passion. I can actually feel it. Is that something you've kickstarted already?
Yeah, well, it's something, I mean, we recently ran an event of our own for our LPs and prospective investors, and the theme of the night was science fiction. On one hand, because the stuff happening in the health field is the stuff that a few years ago you would have thought was science fiction. A urine test for breast cancer, little nano robots that crawl around inside your brain and deliver drugs directly to a tumor. I mean, things that you would have never imagined. On the other hand, there are people selling stuff that is pure fiction. Right? I mean, Brian Johnson is one of the most famous voices in the sector. He recently sponsored his own Netflix documentary. He does cutting edge stuff like take his own young son's blood and inject it into himself. Now, that sounds pretty silly, but in mice, if you inject young mouse blood into old mice, it makes the old mice act younger. So it might work. Now, 99% of drugs that get tested on mice fail before they get to humans. So the odds of it working are maybe not so good, but he's perfectly entitled to do whatever he wants to himself. And his whole story was he was just doing it for himself. He describes his project as Do Not Die. Well, then he hosted a documentary, and now he's selling a stack of supplements. And those supplements are largely unproven, and he's selling them for $500. And if you went and bought them separately, even if you did want them, they'd cost $100. And now he's talking about making Do Not Die a religion. And I've actually got a video clip of him saying that his only competitor is Jesus Christ. So, this area is complicated, and it's not populated only by good guys.
Absolutely. I mean, I think that Jesus Christ analogy is what kind of sold it for me and made me kind of realize that there may be a lot of deluded people out there,
Yeah, well, look, I mean, and when you're talking about health, a little bit like money, but even more, you're preying on people's hopes, right? I mean, if you're a lifelong depression or anxiety sufferer, if you have insomnia, if you have cancer, and somebody tells you they can fix it, especially if it's easy, it's pretty easy to jump at that, right? And expecting the consumer to be able to sort out their way through that. Again, doctors are imperfect, but they have a Hippocratic oath, which basically says they'll try to do their best all the time. That's why we're horrified when we're hearing a story about a doctor who did something wrong on purpose. But it happens all the time in the wellness field.
Just really surprised me, to be honest. I just did want to ask one final question. What piece of advice would you give to an investor that's just starting out in the wellness industry?
Yeah, I think the most important, whether in the wellness industry or anywhere, I think the most important advice for an investor is to ride on the coattails of somebody who's already established a name for themselves, whether that's investing in a fund or partnering with other investors or whatever. It's very hard to get good deal flow. So unless you're already an expert and you're already entrenched in an area. So, I mean, if you've been a CEO of a pharmaceutical company and you want to invest in pharmaceutical startups, probably that's not so hard. But otherwise, it's really hard to make sure you're seeing the right companies, right? Because if I'm the entrepreneur and I'm sitting here, and imagine I'm a great entrepreneur with a great company, I'm thinking about whose money do I want, and I kind of have my choice. So I'm looking out there for people who can add expertise, people who I can trust. And if Matt Cooper shows up for the first day with some money and says, "Hey, I want to invest in health tech," nobody knows who I am. So it's connecting yourself to the ecosystem in some way. I mean, the other thing, of course, if you're going to be an angel investor, is you need to be prepared to put in the time. You need to have enough resources to diversify, because early stage investing is risky. You don't want to make 3 investments. You want to make 30 over time. So, whether being an angel or investing in a fund, if you want to invest in early stage businesses, it's figuring out, how much time and energy and money you have. It's making sure that you connect yourself to the ecosystem so you're not getting the leftover junk. And then it's a lot of practice.
I definitely want to say thank you. This is most certainly
My absolute pleasure.
this has been a brilliant conversation. You've dropped a lot of gems. It's like my brain is still processing quite a lot. I'm happy that we actually get to hear it firsthand from yourself. Yeah, it's been a great, very great conversation.
Well, thank you. No, it was a pleasure.
Thank you for hopping on. But yeah, people, that's been another episode of the Navvai Shift. I've been joined again by my co-host Darnell, and our exceptional guest has been Matt Cooper. So thank you so much. We appreciate it. All right.
My pleasure again. Thank you.
No worries. Thank you.